All right. Just want to check and make sure I'm live. I should be good to go indeed. Hello, everyone. It is Neil here from EDM Tips for this week's Tuneful Tuesday. Welcome back to those of you who have joined us before, and to those of you watching for the first time, welcome aboard to these Tuneful Tuesday streams. Every single week, we get together here on this channel, and I'll be providing my feedback on your tracks live and on the spot. Now, track feedback is open to anyone who is enrolled in either the EDM Tips Accelerator or the Radio Ready program. And if you're not already enrolled in one of those, you can learn more a little bit about them via the link below in the description. Now, if you are enrolled in one of those courses and you're interested in getting feedback, all you need to do is go to your course page. Near the top of your page, you should see a link to submit for track feedback. If you submit that before the time of this stream every single week, I'll queue you up and I'll be providing my thoughts for a couple or a few minutes live and on the spot. All right, guys, with that, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we'll kick things off nice and strong today. Our first submission is coming from Yaniv, who's coming out of our EDM Tips Accelerator. And Yaniv is saying, hey, Neil, this is a track which I did after my surgery. I can't stop producing. The break and the drop at around 220 would be great. Thanks. Awesome, Yaniv. Well, hope the surgery went well enough. And yeah, let's check out the break and the drop around 220 with Sandstorm. Lovely sense of atmosphere and space here to start the break. This piano is sounding really nice. I think because it's the only element, though, we can make it shine even further. So I would apply something like the Oxford inflator or some saturation with the sine curve to start bringing out a little bit more of those upper harmonics to the piano. It might also be worth sidechaining the reverb against the piano just a touch. I like the various ARP and synth layers that you've got. I think they're working well tonally and texturally. If you want to increase the amount of interest in this section, I would play around with using some auto panners on some of these ARPs, so that basically your couple of different ARP layers aren't just staying in a static position, but are moving around from note to note and kind of trading places with each other to a degree. That'll create a really constantly shifting and dynamic location of these elements in your mix, which is going to add loads of interest to this breakdown. Build into the drop. So I do think we could probably get more volume out of the kick and the sub bass. Honestly, it sounds okay. Like, the track doesn't necessarily sound thin, but even when I'm boosting my subwoofer, to make sure it's connected, even when I'm boosting my subwoofer a decent amount, I can't quite feel that kick and that thump. So you do want to get that driving a little bit heavier on that low end. Just make sure that when you play this out live, the dance floor really gets awesome. All right, Yaniv, otherwise, fantastic composition. Again, really nice sound choice. Like I said, focus on getting a little bit more kick and sub. And then one last thing, maybe add a little bit more wetness of reverb, or rather bring out some of the high-end characteristics of your reverb with a high-end EQ boost to that reverb channel. In the drop in particular, just to help give a little bit more like of a euphoric feeling to the track. All right, let's give it up for Yaniv with Sandstorm. Up next, we've got a track submission coming from Wesley out of our Radio Ready program. And Wesley's saying, hey Neil, I've made adjustments to the drums and builds from the previous week's feedback. Thanks for your valuable insights. Awesome, Wesley. Yeah, let's see what we got with Revelation. Great groove again to start. There's just such a cool rhythm in this track. It gets me going every time. Nice. So during this build, I might start saturating and bringing out the volume of that like single drone note, that wah, wah, wah sort of sound, just a little bit more near the tail ends of the build. Just help bring out a little bit more power, a little bit more tension and energy before the transition. Okay, so in the top end, there's some sort of like fluttery-like layer. It's not quite your percussion, but there was something in the top end that had like a whoosh, whoosh sort of sound to it. It was a little bit too loud and taking away from the dynamic range and separation of the drums. So on that particular layer, I would dial that back about like 6 decibels. That should leave you with a lot more space for the drums. Great work with the Foley in the drop, or in the break here. Now, since this Foley has like a handful of voices to it, like it's kind of like a room chatter, I might suggest taking an imager to that layer and spreading it really nice and wide. That'll really help us lean into that feeling of being in that environment, as opposed to just kind of hearing that environment from a distance. One thing, it's kind of optional, but it's worth experimenting with at the very least. I would try a quick like reverse sound before the drop hits. It could be like a reverse kick, it could be a reverse vocal, a reverb, it doesn't really matter. Just something to help kind of bring us back up into the existence of sound, because everything's faded out really quietly. So to just hit us out of nowhere with a really big impact and drop like this, it can be a little bit jarring. Now granted, that can be a good thing if you're intending to kind of like catch the audience by surprise and push them into a dancing mood. But like I said, experiment with having a short reverse leading into that drop. See if you like the way it connects those two sections, and if not, then take it out. Awesome. All right, well, let's give it up for Wesley with Revelation. Up next, we've got a track coming from Rajesh out of our Radio Ready program. And Rajesh is just looking for some general feedback, so let's see what we've got with Endothermic. Nice groove to start. You could probably bring out a little bit of the delay on these chords, just to help fill in the space a little bit more, add a little bit of extra texture and interest into the intro. I think you could also do to saturate those chords a little bit heavier. That'll thicken them up, bring them a little bit more forward in the mix, and help us perceive that distant pad layer that you have as the far back wall. Currently, they don't seem like too far away from each other, so I guess the alternative is that you could reduce the volume of that pad layer as well. One other thing that you could do to make this track a little bit more dancey and energetic is, rather than having your chords just hit like 3 times per measure, like the down, 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 create a little bit more of an active rhythm in them. So maybe down, da, 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 right? Something like that, where we have a little bit more motion in the chords. Entirely up to you. If you're not trying to create more danciness, then obviously you're fine exactly as is. But if you are trying to make this, full-on dance track start to finish, then we do need a little bit more rhythm driving some of the earlier parts of the track. I do think we can use a little bit more low end on this track, primarily in the kick. I think your sub could come up a little bit as well, but I would also make sure to sidechain the sub a little bit more heavily against the kick. Cool. Otherwise, really nice atmosphere, great vibe going on with this, good flow to the track so far. Yeah, let's give it up for Rajesh with Endothermic. Up next, it looks like I've got a track submission coming from David out of the Radio Ready program, and David's just looking for some general feedback, so let's see what we've got with Your Mine. I like the detune going on in those piano chords. That's really nice. I might suggest adding a faint delay onto these chords so that in the spaces in between those riffs, we get just a little bit of a sense of distance and some extra texture to fill in that space. Good groove going on. I think the piano chords feel a little bit rushed in the groove compared to everything else, so it might be worth nudging them back just a tick or like a few milliseconds. Nice power from the kick right now, good clarity in the top drums. I am missing a little bit of body in like the sub bass range and the low bass range. I can hear an upper bass texture, but it kind of sounds like it taps out at around 200 hertz and doesn't go too much lower than that. So I would make sure that you get some sort of sub bass in here and like a thicker low bass that's going to help fill out those frequencies from like 80 to 200 hertz as well. You have some like background melodic riffs playing in there. It's like a da 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 da. I would bring those out in volume a decent amount. Maybe saturate them a little bit further as well. That's going to be carrying like the most interest and form of melody in this section, so we really want to make sure the listener can hear that part clearly. Cool. So I like this new section. I think we need a little bit more of a defined transition between these two. So maybe a little bit of a more, a longer drum fill, maybe a little bit of like a reverb washout or an impact or effect sweep, some sort of extra ear candy in there to like really signal to the listener that we're coming up on a big section change. Yeah, and seeing in the chat, Mikuma was wondering, is it a better group to move them a little later when I was talking about the piano chords? Exactly that, yeah, just nudging them a little bit back in time would help out. Cool. All right, David, otherwise, really fantastic vibe, great groove as overall, as I said again. Love the sound selection. Yeah, let's give it up for David with Your Mine. All right, up next, we've got a track submission coming from Max out of our Accelerator program. And Max is just looking for feedback on the mix, wondering, is it muddy, or things standing out enough, or too much reverb? Many thanks. All right, let's see what we got with Take It Back. Nice. Really cool sense of space. There is a lot of reverb on here, and I kind of like the vibe that it creates. However, it is messing with our sense of space in the mix. So given how loud those reverb elements are, we wouldn't expect quite as much reverb on them. So what I would probably suggest doing is actually dialing up a little bit more reverb wetness to these perk layers if you want to lean into this kind of washy space, at least from the start of the track. Now, as the track progresses, you can start to take away some of that reverb and maybe automate it down so that the track almost like starts in this atmospheric feeling and then comes into clarity slowly over time. Really nice groove. I love the bass line sound that you've got. It's, really nice and pure. Doesn't have too much texture, but does have enough to cut through the mix. You probably could add a tiny bit more thickness to the kick and snare. Just some extra saturation should do the trick. This is a really nice vibe and groove so far. I'm hearing just a tiny bit of mud in the low mids around like 120, 160 hertz. It sounds to me kind of like a washy version of the bass, so my guess is that you've got some of this bass sent to reverb or some sort of spatial effect, because it does sound relatively distant. It's not sounding completely dry. On whatever reverb is, or whatever's contributing to that bass's distance, whether it's reverb, a little faint delay, maybe a little chorus or something, on that particular channel, I would just reduce a tiny bit of EQ in that 140 hertz-ish area. That should help clean up a little bit of that mud. You might even be able to get away with just doing it on the sides of the mix. Yeah, it's very faint though, so I wouldn't do more than like a half decibel of reduction at the most. Awesome. All right, well that was absolutely awesome. Really lovely vibe. Let's give it up for Max there with Take It Back. Up next, we've got a track coming from Jamie out of our Accelerator program as well. And Jamie's looking for feedback from about 3 minutes from the post-drop, build, and final drop, looking at the balance of elements, vocals, and how they're mixed, and also if the bass needs changing up. This is a pre-master and probably needs some subtractive EQ on some elements. Thanks as always. All right, let's see what we got going on here from about 3 minutes. Yeah, let's see what we got. Nice groove so far. The sound of the piano is nice, but it doesn't quite match the sense of space as the rest of the mix. I'm gonna take this back there so I can hear it again clearly. So I think we need a little bit more high end on the piano or on those chords, so I would open up the filtering just a little bit. You could probably add a small EQ reduction around like 600 hertz or so to help take out a little bit of this like low mid buildup, and I should actually say it's probably more around like 900 hertz. And then you might actually benefit from a small EQ boost in like the 200 to 400 hertz range, just to help add a little bit more body to those chords as well. Overall, you've got a pretty solid balance of your elements. The kick is a little bit too quiet in the mix, so I'd bring that up a decent amount. I'm also not really feeling it on my subwoofer, even when I push the subwoofer pretty hard. So in addition to bringing the kick up in volume, maybe consider a little bit of a low-end EQ boost on it. The same thing goes for the bass. I'm not really hearing too much of the bass, so I think the bass just needs to come up in volume a decent amount. I'm hearing a little bit of the top end of the bass, but it does look like there's like a relative lack of sub, and then that information from like 100 to 200 hertz. If you want to bring a little bit more energy and presence to this track, I might suggest side chaining the reverb against the clap layer that you've got, so that clap takes a little bit more of a present role, and then the reverb will set in the gaps between those claps. Mint Boom was asking, are the hats too bright? I wouldn't quite say so. They definitely have like a decent amount of volume, but they have also, enough wetness of reverb that they're sitting far enough back in the mix. I don't really have a complaint with the hi-hats there. Cool. All right, well, really nice work. Let's give it up for Jamie there with Desire. Up next, we've got a track coming from Tommy out of our Radio Ready program. And Tommy's saying, hi, this is my take on house music. It's weird as always. Please give me some advice on how to make it more dance floor friendly. In the beginning, you'll hear stacked chords like E7 over C, etc. Could sound weird, but I like the tension it makes. Good to know. All right, let's see what we got with Disco Nights, Tommy. So I'm fine with your chords as is. I do agree they create like this nice sense of tension, this really nice sense of emotion. This kind of like distorted lead that started coming in on top of them didn't quite match the tonality of those chords though. So I would probably suggest reworking the notes of that lead to align with the chords a little more closely. Nice. The groove groove and the vibe of that vocal is working really well, but it is a little bit quiet and hidden in the mix. So I would suggest starting by opening up the high end. If you've cut out anything with the EQ, I would open that back up, and otherwise I would then suggest adding a little bit of top end with a tool like Fresh Air by Slate Digital, maybe some high end coloring EQ boost to bring out a lot of the airiness and the texture of these vocals. Bassline's working nicely. I am getting a little bit of like muddiness and lack of clarity in the track. I think it's coming from the top end of the bass and the low end of the chords. So make sure you're cutting out a little bit more of the low end of those chords to just create a little bit more separation and space between the bass and the bottom end of those chords. If you want to make this track a little bit more dance floor friendly as a whole, I think your percussion are in a pretty solid spot. I would suggest sidechaining your other elements like the sustained pads and stuff of the sorts a little bit more heavily against like a kick so that we get a degree of like a pulsing and pumping rhythm and feel in there.
Flashing lights, spinning balls, disco night.
You could also bring out a little bit more the low end of the kick. Your sub bass is in a really good spot as is, but I'm not quite feeling the thump of the kick the way that I really feel.
Colored squares, flashing lights, spinning balls, disco night.
Another thing that would help would be adding a little bit more energy to the drums. So some extra saturation, particularly like a little bit of high-end bite, so maybe some high-end coloring EQ. It won't need much, but it'll help give these drums just a little bit more texture, a little bit more edge. Awesome. All right, let's give it up for Tommy with Disco Nights. Up next, I've got a track coming from Renee out of our Accelerator program. And Renee's saying, hey, Neil, how is it going? It's going well, Renee. Thank you very much. After your feedback a couple weeks ago, I made all the changes and would like to try to practice mastering with this track. What else could I improve? All right, yeah, let's see what we got with Don't You Worry. Great groove and flow from the start. If you want to bring out a little bit more groove and danciness here, you can consider sidechaining some of these percussion layers a little bit more heavily against the kick. It doesn't need to be completely ducked, but it will give us a little bit more of that up and down motion from beat to beat. Cool. I think this vocal could use a little bit more saturation and a tiny bit of low mid coloring EQ around like 300 hertz. And then maybe just a tiny bit of extra high end coloring EQ to bring out some of the airiness and texture as well. Nice groove going on here. I think you could bring up the volume of the kick a decent amount, probably just like a decibel or two rather. But then I would also suggest bringing out the top end of the kick a little bit more by boosting up the highs with a high shelf EQ. I'd agree with what Westlake just dropped in the chat. Lovely bass going on here. Could bring a little bit more volume to the claps in the drop, or like the snares, whatever that sound is. Maybe also I'd suggest layering another sample with a little bit more body to it. The current clap snare sound that you got sounds just a little bit thin in that drop. Nice drop there. That's a cool switch up. I might suggest trying to get a little bit more width on this lead, just because that'll help us lean into that moment of contrast, since in the build everything is already relatively in the center. This is a good chance to just switch things up and hit the audience with a super wide sound. Cool. Cool. All right, well, let's give it up for Renee with Don't You Worry. Really nice work on this track. All right, let's see. Up next, we've got a track submission coming from Brahm out of our Accelerator program. And Brahm is saying, "Hi, Neil. I've tried to make a Core Gen 1 track and created some cool vocal effects. I'm curious towards your feedback. I'm especially curious towards the vocals effect halfway in the drop. Plus, I'm curious towards the vocal effect from the second build to the drop. Anyways, let me know what you think and what could be improved." All right, let's see what we've got going on here with Late Night. Late Night Shift. Nice groove, nice bass line from the start. I think it could bring a little bit more low end power to the mix a little earlier in the track. If I boost my sub, I can feel like a decent amount of like that kind of tail end of the kick. I would like a little bit more of the initial impact and then just a little bit more volume on that low end in general. Cool, so I think these vocals are a little bit out of place in the mix. I would suggest adding some reverb to them to help put them in the same sense of space. Then I would also suggest adding some extra high end using a tool like Fresh Air by Slate Digital. That'll help bring out a lot of the extra top end characteristics, let that vocal really shine. Particularly the claps could use just a little bit of extra saturation and thickness to them. So these piano chords that just came in the drop, I would suggest making those super wide because we've already got a decent amount of information going on in the center of the track, and there's a lot of space on those sides for some extra power. Yeah, I like that vocal effect that you've got going on. It sounds, as soon as you get to like the choppy part here, it sounds like the chops are just a little bit late in the pocket because they have a faint attack to them. I would either nudge those chops to the left or take away some of that attack so that they come in a little bit more abruptly. Cool. So I like the creativity of that vocal effect. I think you need to bring in the pitch bend down a little bit later. I think it comes in a little too soon. And then keep it for a little bit longer and make the reverse back up a little short. So I think that the reverse back up also starts coming in just a little bit too early. Awesome. All right, Brum, that takes care of it. Everything else here is sounding really, really nice. So great work. One final thing, actually. I think we could use a little bit more saturation on the bass. The mid-range tonal frequencies of it are sounding really nice, but I'm not quite getting as much high-end from that bass as I'd like. I also think we could use a little bit more of the low mids around like 100 hertz or so, just for some extra power and body on that bass. All right, let's give it up for Brahm there. Up next, we've got a track coming from Jeff out of our Accelerator program, and Jeff is saying, "Hey Neil, curious your thoughts on whether I achieved the separation we discussed on last week's group call. I still feel some of the elements aren't in the right space, but it's much closer than before. If you could listen to both drops and the breakdown, that would be great. Thank you and hope you enjoy." All right, yeah, let's see what we got with Holding On. Sounding really nice. You got a good sense of separation among these elements, good sense of width overall. I think that either the bass or the ARP should be given just a touch of width. It doesn't need to be spread far to the sides, but currently both your bass and your ARP are your two main textural elements from a melodic standpoint. They're both sitting right in the center. Now granted, like you have them separate in the frequency space, so we're still able to hear them, but I think we could get a little bit more clarity behind them and also a little bit more fullness in the mix if we just spread one of those two elements a little bit wider. also bring out a little bit more of the presence range of this ARP pluck layer with like a coloring EQ boost around 5 or 6 kilohertz. That should help add some nice shine to this layer. So I love the wide atmospheres that you've got here. I think the bass is a little bit quiet in this breakdown, so you could definitely add some saturation. You know, going back to our discussion earlier, I think that the bass would make the most sense to be nice and wide here, because it does feel a little bit separate from the atmospheric feel of the rest of the track, given how mono that bass line currently is. So I would spread that bass really nice and wide, maybe go into the sound design and just add an extra voice or two so that we have some natural width coming from the synth itself. Otherwise, the textures, the sense of space, the different subtle layers in this breakdown are all super pretty. Really nice work with your use of reverb. By this point, I would start kind of ramping back up a little bit more in terms of volume, saturation, clarity against the reverb. Yeah, I think we could get a little bit more of an emotional swell heading into this final drop. Puma's asking, what is he doing to make that ARP sound so non-robotic? I'd agree, it sounds really nice and lovely. One of the biggest things that I'm hearing in there is the use of like a filter automated to various notes. So on the higher notes, that filter tends to open up a little bit more. On the lower notes, that filter stays closed. So we get this really nice up and down feeling of brightness and energy through the ARP layer, just based on the way that filter is changing from note to note. All right, really nice work here. Let's give it up for Jeff with Holding On. Up next, I've got a track coming from Steve out of our Accelerator program. And Steve is saying, hey, Neil, going from the start will be fine. Thanks. Looking for a check on the low end, the bass, general mixing, and anything else that is worth addressing. Thank you. Yeah, let's see what we got with Far Away. Great riff. You know, I might take like one layer out of the intro, maybe like those reverse or like those violin answers against the guitar. It'll just help give us a little bit more attention to the main melody riff itself, which is super interesting. Nice groove here. I think you can get a little bit more low-end thump to the kick. The kick has a nice top end, a nice mid-range to it. I'm not quite getting that body in the sub-range. I can feel it if I boost my sub, so it's in there, you just need to bring it out a little bit more. In terms of the bass, I think you're mostly in a good spot. We could probably get a little bit more weight on the sub bass as well. So this new like answer horn layer that you've got that's coming on the right channel, really lovely texture, really lovely sound. I would either suggest keeping it a little bit more central or a little bit more to the right. The reason is meanwhile you've had this like chord like layer off to the left channel the entire time, and it's been so far on the left that we either need something to balance it by being very far on the right, or we just need to let it continue to be off on its own on the left and have something in the center. By having this new horn melody come slightly off to the right, we just create a perception of a mix that was shifted overall a little bit to the left, as opposed to having like an intentionally imbalanced mix at that point. Getting just a tiny bit of buildup in the bass around 120 hertz, so a very faint EQ reduction around there should help out. nice work here. Beautiful elements, great choice, great groove, really nice chill vibe here. Yeah, let's give it up for Steve with Far Away. Up next, we've got a track coming from Maxwell. And Max, I see that you had just commented in the chat. So yeah, confirmed I've got yours. So let's see. Maxwell's saying, would love some feedback on the vibe as a whole, not mixed or mastered. So volume up, please. If you could play it from the beginning to 135, from 155 to 230 for a bass change, and then the main drop at 330 until the end. I'm still working out the arrangement, but I'd love if these sections could be played if possible. Thanks very much. All right, yeah, let's see what we got with Monatomic. Great groove, good vibe. I like this bass line, good groove. You might be able to simplify it rhythmically, actually just a touch. If you remove 1 or 2 notes per measure, that'll help create a little bit more space. You've already got a nice groove going on. You've got a nice foundation. That little bit of extra space will actually help us lean into that sense of the groove a little bit more. Right here at this moment, we're getting a little bit of mud between those strings and these bass notes. I don't mind the idea of a string coming in there, but rather than playing chords, I might suggest like have the string just play like a note at a time and kind of play like a good counter melody in the background. Nice job with this vocal choice. There's a little bit of buildup in the fundamental frequency of this vocal, so I might suggest a touch of multiband compression to that low mid end of the vocal. And then let's see, about 155. Nice. So when this sustained mid-range bass pad chord-like layer comes in, we do get a little bit of muddiness in the bass line. I would suggest pitching that layer up an octave or two so that it's not like really kind of taking away from this low mid space where our rhythmic bass line is living. And then let's check that drop at 3 minutes really quickly. I think the chords are a little bit too loud and too thick here. The magic of what's making your track work is the space in it and that sense of the bass line and the way it plays against the smoother, continued feel of the drums and that harp layer and the vocal layer. So these chord layers don't necessarily contribute as much to the effectiveness of the song. Now they help fill out some space. They're good to have in there, but I think they are a little too loud and have a little too many voices to them. So I would remove a note or two from a couple of the layers to help thin it out a little bit. Leave that space a little bit more open in the mid-range, so we have that clean contrast between the low end of the bass and the high end of our drums and our harp layer. Cool. Really nice track there, Maxwell. Yeah, let's give it up for him with Monatomic. Up next, we've got a track coming from Matt out of our Accelerator program. And Matt's is saying, hey, Neil, this is an idea I'm currently working on. It's the second break and drop in the track. Looking forward to your feedback on the idea as a whole. Is the arrangement so far solid? Anything that can be added or improved is appreciated. All right, let's see what we got with dancing. So this like fuzzy lead that was kind of coming in. It doesn't quite gel with your R player throughout this idea. It has a little bit too interesting of a texture to itself as the R player. So I would suggest taking out that particular, or maybe subbing it out for something with a texture that's a little bit more similar to the R player's texture. The word comes and sun comes up is coming in just a little early. I would suggest warping that vocal so that we have a little bit more space between sun and comes. Nice bass line. Great groove and get some solid interest in here. I'm not 100% sold on the chord you've chosen for the third chord in your progression. I think we could create a little bit more tension, a little bit more energy in the track if instead of going down, we go up to a slightly higher chord. So experiment with a couple of other chord options for that third chord in your progression kind of throughout the track. Otherwise, everything else in that drop is sounding really nice. Again, good sound design. You could probably bring up the volume of the drums a decent amount and just saturate them further to help drive a little bit of extra energy, a little bit more bite into that drum line. All right, let's give it up for Matt's. Yeah, nice work on this idea. I'd say definitely finish building that one out. All right, up next, we've got a track coming from Will out of our Accelerator program. And Will is just looking for some general feedback overall, so let's see what we've got with Another Day. Nice start here. I think the kick has just a tiny bit of like a boxy mid-range buildup around like 800 hertz or so. So apply a small dip in that range with an EQ. And then I'd also consider boosting up the low end a little further so that we have a little bit of a defined thump right from the start of the track. If I boost my sub, I can feel it in there, so you really just need to bring up what you've already got. Just a low end EQ boost should do the trick. Nice. I might suggest a little bit of a heavier like reverb washout in the final moments of that build. That'll help create a little bit more of a thin texture before the full power of the drop, giving us more contrast and therefore a perceived heavier drop. I think the snare drum needs a little bit more low-end body to it. It's got a nice mid-range and high-end splash to it. I think you could bring out a tiny bit more of the low-end body of that snare. And then, like I said earlier, I still think we need a little bit more thump in the kick. You could probably also just bring up the kick a couple or a few decibels in general. It is feeling just a little bit quiet in the mix overall. You've got some really nice thickness and texture in your chords. What I'm not getting from them is the sense of brightness and energy that really is going to drive the track. Now you've got two options. You can either leave your chords exactly as is, and then instead lend a little bit more weight to some hi-hats and some cymbals all the way through the drop. Or you could try adding some like white noise and maybe boosting the high end of your chords a little bit more so that we get that top end shine and energy that's going to really bring a lot of life to the track.
New days from here, I'm far away. Come with me.
Vocals really nice. There's a little bit of like a harsh buildup around like 7 or 8 kilohertz. I would sweep with an EQ around there, look for that harsh frequency, and then just apply an EQ to it, wherever that's happening. Sounds like there's also like a little bit of like a tonal buildup around like 1200 hertz or so maybe a small bit of multi-band compression there. I would also suggest just a touch of like Fresh Air by Slate Digital to bring out some more airiness in the very top edge, give us a nice like sense of shine, help that vocal really stand out. Nice. The final thing I'd look for in this track is a little bit more like low mid-range bass power. So coming from the sub and then that bass that's going to live just above in like the 100 to 200 hertz range. Awesome. Otherwise, really nice work there. Let's give it up for Will. Up next, we've got a track submission coming from Uwe out of our Accelerator program. And Uwe is looking for feedback in general at 14 seconds, 113 to 134. The cue for sound selection and design of drop. Okay, so I'm guessing you're just wondering, about the sound selection and sound design of the drop. So let's see what we got with Melodic Techno Feel Me. Nice groove, nice vibe from the start. I would bring up a little bit more of that low end of the kick. It's pretty close as is, but could use just a little bit more weight. Yeah, as soon as I boost my sub, this track actually feels really, really nice. So bringing up the low end of the kick and the sub bass, I think would be a good idea. I like how you've got like these really nice, bright, high-end plucks on the side, leaving plenty of space in the center for our drums and percussion, which have a little bit more of a mid-range body to them. I do think your percussion could use just a tiny bit more saturation to drive a little bit more energy into the top end of those drums, but it doesn't need much. You're in a close spot as is. This new lead that's coming in, this now, has a little bit of build up at the fundamental frequency, so I might suggest just a little bit of an EQ dip around there. It should be around like 800 hertz or so, I think is where I'm hearing it. Maybe more like 600.
Can you feel me?
Nice use of that vocal. I would bring up the vocal in volume by a couple more decibels. In this part, since you're kind of like approaching the final moments of the build, I would start filtering out some of the low end of the track, particularly in that bass line, just so that again we get to the drop and we get a little bit more power out of that moment. Awesome groove here. This is working really, really nice. I think just a little bit more saturation across the board on all of your elements. Now this is like, it's the kind of, thing that you could probably just do on the master channel if you want to, with just a little bit more power and drive, because the overall balance of your elements is really, really nice there too. Nice use of sound design, good little bit of ear candy and interest in there. The final thing I'd probably suggest is at this moment, rather than letting that shaker continue on, give us like a reverb or an echo splash where it just kind of fades out at the end. All right, really nice work there, Uwe. Up next, we've got a track submission coming from Philip out of our Accelerator program. He's saying, "Hi Neil, unfortunately I couldn't really finish the track until today, especially transitions in the second break, but would like to know what you think so far about this idea. Thanks." All right, let's see what we got with this demo. I like this vibe, kind of like you're walking up on some sort of performance in this like nice realistic sense of space. To make it even a little bit more realistic, I would suggest making that reverb a stereo reverb that has a little bit more width to it as well. The current one is just a little bit too central. The vocal seems a little bit, I think it's flat. No, it might actually be sharp. No, okay, it is flat. Okay, so I would just suggest tuning that vocal a little bit so that it is aligning a little bit more purely with the key of the rest of the song. I guess it's in key, but it's like pitch drifting a little bit too much from your instrumental. Great groove going on in the drop. I know you haven't like gotten deep into the mix or anything yet, but as you do, I would suggest like focusing on putting a little bit more energy and brightness to the drums, some like high-end EQ, some coloring, saturation. All of that will help bring a little bit more life to that drum kit. Nice vocal delay there. This piano has a great body and texture to it.
So give me a sign, baby. So tell me you want me, baby. So give me a love, baby. So tell me you want me, baby. So give me a sign.
I like the percussion that's playing in here too. Something about the vocal isn't quite gelling in here rhythmically and groove-wise. It seems like it's falling just outside of the pocket of what the percussion and the piano are doing. nice. I might suggest a little bit more of a defined build, so adding like a riser, some sort of effects transition stuff, just so it's like very obvious that we're approaching that drop moment when we do. I like your various melodic riffs, good groove, good drum patterns. Cool. All right, nice work, Philip. Yeah, let's give it up for him with this demo. Up next, we got a track coming from Dan out of our Radio Ready program. And Dan is looking for some feedback on the drums, bass, and organ at 58. And then a general mixdown and mastering from 4 minutes. All right, let's see what we got with You Don't Know Love. Nice. Great vibe, good sense of space. All of your elements are sounding really nice and separate. I think we could lean into it a little bit further if you just bring a tiny bit more high-end energy to these drums with a very subtle high-end EQ boost, ideally from a coloring EQ. That'll bring those drums just a half step forward in the mix, give them that little bit of extra presence, and let them really be the foreground element, and the rest of your instrumental can kind of live behind it as it's currently doing. I do think you could probably bring up the bass line itself a little bit more, at the very least the sub of the bass. I don't necessarily feel like there's like a lack of body in the track, but I'm not quite getting the drive from the low end, creating that groove that I'd be looking for, especially out of like your consistent sound band. So yeah, just drive that bass a little bit heavier. What kind of frequency for the drum boost? I'd say like pretty high up there, like 10 kilohertz or so. Maybe 8 kilohertz, but definitely no lower than 8. Tommy, sure thing. I just saw what you said in the chat there. All right, let's jump ahead and look at the mixdown and mastering from 4 minutes and on. Nice. So Dan, I think the biggest thing for you in this section is going to be playing with stereo width a little bit more. Most of our elements are relatively central in the track, so we've got a lot of space on these far sides. You could place the percussion there, you could place that counter melody in there, even the chords could sound really great, nice and wide. It's kind of up to you what you spread out to the sides, but I would suggest taking one of your core elements and pushing those fairly wide. Some of the notes of this background horn melody, this they're not quite gelling in key with the rest of the track. I would suggest diving in and making sure that as you have modal interchange in your chords, you're matching that modal interchange in this melody as well. Cool. Everything else was sounding really nice. Maybe just again a little bit more weight in that sub and then like the 100 hertz area of the bass. Cool. All right, really nice work, Dan. Let's give it up for him with You Don't Know Love. Up next, we've got a track submission coming from Dan Westlake out of our Dan Gurr, out of our Radio Ready program. And Dan's just looking for some general feedback at around, I think, 1 minute 30. So let's see what we got with Dreaming First Mix. I might have made that up. I see, Daniel, that you say 1.3 in the chat. I'm going to just kind of play it from the start. Let me know if you're watching the stream now. Let me know if there's a specific timestamp that you do want me to jump to. Nice sense of space and atmosphere from the start. You've done a good job at communicating the groove right away through the pulsing of that pad, and as this percussion is coming in, it seems to be matching it pretty nicely. Nice. You have like kind of like this low mid bass like synth in there. I would bring that up a decent amount in volume at this point. Give us some like low end weight to this track. Although I hear you are starting to kind of bring it in a little bit more slowly. You know, I still stand by my comment. I think we could bring a little bit more in a little sooner. Nice. Great writing here. I do think we need a little bit more power from the kick drum, so I'd bring that up in volume a decent amount. And then maybe consider a small low-end EQ boost to it and a tiny high-end EQ boost to it as well. I can hear it tucked in the mix, but it is pretty quiet even when I boost my sub a decent amount. So yeah, I'd bring that kick up probably around 6 to 10 decibels. Ooh, nice ARP here. Those claps that are playing in the background could use a little bit more saturation and thickness to them at this stage. Nice. Okay, so yeah, in addition to bringing up the kick drum, I would also saturate the kick drum a little further to give it some extra thickness. Same thing goes for the bass. I think that bass could benefit from some hefty saturation to really drive loads of power into it. You've got the perfect sound design for it, we just now need that energy and emotion coming from it. There's also maybe a tiny bit of buildup in the bass right around like 110 hertz. So a very subtle EQ dip there could help out. It's actually closer to like 130 hertz, I think. Very nice vibe, very nice groove going on here. Nice. Maybe in the final moments of this, start automating up a little bit of like a reverb washout as well. That'll help us just transition into that splash moment really cleanly. All right, really nice work there, Dan. And last but not least, we've got a track submission coming from Gordon out of our Radio Ready program. And he's saying, "Hi, Neil. This track is from last week with some of the adjustments from last week. Only had an hour on it. Thanks." All right, yeah, let's see what we got with You Know You Love It Mix 2. Nice, good power right from the start. This kick drum might have a tiny bit of buildup right around 180 hertz. It could be just coming from buildup with the low end of those percussion layers too. Either way, since you've got the percussion playing, I would apply a small EQ dip around 180 hertz in that kick. Top end textures of the bass sound really nice. I think we could sidechain the bass a little bit more heavily against the kick though, because I am getting a little bit of buildup and mud when those two play together. I think your top end percussion, or really all of your percussion, yeah, like the various like bongos, congas, shakers, etc. All of those, I think we could use a little bit more saturation, thickness, and volume to them. They're just a tiny bit lost in the mix currently. Nice. A little bit more high end on this vocal would probably help too. Again, a tool like Fresh Air by Slate Digital would be perfect.
You wanna dance with me.
Nice. So in the final moments of that build, I might suggest cutting out just a little bit more of the low end. Like you've done a good job cutting out like the deep low end, but we still have a decent amount of like low mid weight in that. I would just take out that low cut filter, or rather make that low cut filter a little bit more aggressive by the final moments of the build. Cool. Yeah, the biggest thing for me now is that I've kind of lost a little bit of the groove and the dynamic range that was coming from the drums and the bass because our chord layers, our reverb layers and stuff, the sorts have become so thick. Saturating and bringing out those drums a lot is going to help, like I already suggested. Past that, I might suggest side chaining these, like, you know, sustained reverb layers and stuff of the sorts a little bit more heavily against the kick drum at the very least. Oh man, amazing little written pun in there, Rob. Good to have you back at it too, Rob. Cool. All right, Gordon, everything else here I think is working out quite nicely. Like I said, just focus on creating a little bit more space, a little bit more energy and brightness, particularly on those drums. All right, guys, and with that, I think that is the end of the submissions for today. Absolutely is. So, guys, thank you very much for tuning in. It has been a pleasure as always. I know we've had a few faces that took a little bit of a hiatus coming back today, so great to have you fellas back at it. Keep up all of the hard work to everyone who's been submitting and working on these tracks. Thank you guys again for tuning in. And just as one last chance, if you guys aren't in the Radio Ready program or the Accelerator already, definitely click that link below in the description. Learn a little bit more about the program and see if it's a good fit. We'll also have a chance to sign you up for a one-on-one call with one of us at EDM Tips to just discuss it, see indeed if it is the right time for you to jump into the Accelerator. There is no obligation whatsoever for that call or during that call, but it is a great chance for you to get to know us, for us to get to know you, and again, just kind of determine what might be the best plan for your music moving forward. So guys, thank you very much for joining me. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week ahead, and I look forward to catching you guys again next week on Tuneful Tuesday.